Thank you for having me here today to talk about water for well-being, water and well-being for all, and all means all. So I'm going to stress on the latter part of my talk, why I wish to talk about all means all. And I'm based in India, Ahmedabad, the land of Gandhi, and also a land which is all now considered as a development model of the country, which I'm very much questioning when I'm talking about all means all. And this is a place in state of Gujarat in India. And I'm basically an architect, urban designer, planner with a PhD in public administration from Netherlands, and had an opportunity to work with Professor Elinor Ostrom from Indiana University. And it's nearly 3 decades I'm trying to learn, love, and live with water, without water, in terms of what it is to know more about water. So that, in short, and I think the learning is endless when we dwell into the zone of water. So that gives me an opportunity to talk about water epidemics today, and I'm focusing more on well-being part of it and not literally the diseases, but I will come to it as impact of water. So I'm going to do a bit of reflection, then talk about water resources, then give a snapshot on epidemics and how planning and designing with and without water impacts the health of all. And that is the talk, as I mentioned, well-being for me as well as we. So who are these we? And that's where I'm going to focus how their health matters if we want to talk about our health. So while walking through it, I'm also going to listen to your thoughts. So please feel free to intervene between the slides. And I have very generic slides, not literally talking about what's going on in India, but I'm going to give some snapshot from India as well. So this is the Earth we have. You see two sides of the planet Earth. This is a drawing done by a high school girl from Kolkata, Snigdha Pahari, and she asks us which kind of planet we want, which kind of Earth we are looking for. And I think that's a fundamental question as planning and designing of habitats we should be really looking forward to. Because when we design for human centric, and that's where my reflection comes into picture, so I'm calling it way backward. And I think there has been enough yeah, scholarship as well as practice. So both in even in pedagogy as well, when planning and designing has focused on anthropocentric way of looking at the planet itself, and particularly focusing on habitat. And that has actually resulted us making us indifferent to other creatures of the habitat. So these are the we I'm talking about, and these are the we. When I say all mean all, I mean to say every creature on this planet. And ironically, our discipline has been indifferent to it, and I really feel that I wish I can go back to first year of architecture of bachelor's and start relearning architecture for all, because for 5 years, then for 2 years of urban design, then for another year of MPhil, it was all about humans. I think it was only during PhD my realization started to, hit me, and then start thinking about a lot of our unlearning is required. In this whole process, I mean, I'm now talking about India predominantly, where we have been also indifferent to the way we even design for humans. And a classic example is that we do land use based development, and water, again, we are indifferent to water based planning. And I think that's the genesis of most of the water crisis in India, water epidemics in India. And if we are not even looking at water for ourselves very generously and sensitively, I think we are still far from talking about water for other creatures. And that's my disclaimer, that we're going to be there if they are there. So if we are not planning and designing for other creatures, we are already not only discriminating, but actually we are creating problems for ourselves, whether it is well-being or whether it is the planet's well-being. So now coming to the next part, water resource, how we are looking at it in planning and design. And we tend to pretend the percentage of water in the planet, and not really often related with water. And let me come to the pedagogy of water education in India. There are not many architecture planning schools, and in fact, not even 10% of architecture planning schools that are talking about waterscape, water development, water sensitization, and all those things in water education. And that starts with how much water we have in our body and how much water is there in the city. So when city planning is done, uh, there is not much attention given to the presence of water. And I feel that is because we are not realizing the presence of water in ourselves. So it's interrelated, our presence of water in ourselves, in other creatures, and in the planet. And I think this is missed out. I'm just giving a very primary school slide here intentionally to showcase that it's not only humans but other creatures, whether it is fauna and flora, also have water in their own self. Likewise, city also has water bodies. So we cannot be really going and planning and designing cities based on land and value of land and looking at the economic aspect of it and not the biodiversity and ecology aspect of it. This is a very fundamental slide deliberately done, as I mentioned. High school, middle school, primary school. I mean, this is even kindergarten slide. But I think somewhere in architecture education, we missed this point in 5 years of planning and designing courses. And this is where water is not integrated in development of human habitat. This is also from primary school. The previous was from nursery school. This is a primary school education, again missed out totally in our architecture planning, which we need to really bring back. And this is the fact that it is all one water. So if we keep designing our land and keep beautifying our land and ignoring the water bodies, we are really looking at water as a commodity. And now most of the planning and designing, water is seen as an infrastructure. We are not even talking about different kinds of water body, as I showed in the agenda slide. And the only thing we talk about water is the water cycle, which was again a primary school education. So we have a lot of water in the planet, and still we talk about water crisis, and that is not addressed in the planning and designing of cities. And the fact that it is all one water is somewhere left in the high school education and not brought to the university level, and again focusing on planning and architecture education in India. So why I'm showing this is that what is the repercussion it has in the making of cities and impact of it on our health. Uh, because what we are not showing again in planning and designing of cities is that we are building a city based out of consumerism. We are not building a city based out of lifestyle and occupation of essentialism. It's like an extravaganza lifestyle, and that again comes from the way we are looking at ourselves as individuals. So what we do as individuals, it actually gets reflected in the institutions, and that is how it gets reflected in the pedagogy of education. So if we are not talking about visible water, which is water resources in our city planning and designing, we are far from talking about invisible water. And I'm just giving example again from FMCG, but also showing example how building industry consumes the majority of water in terms of water resources, and that is not discussed so much until recently, when we have started talking about net zero, water positive buildings, and sustainable buildings, and so on and so forth. But that itself is an elitist concept. So so I'm showing slides of an individualistic approach, and I'm using it as a metaphor to look at how planning and design is reflected. So if building industry consumes the majority of water, and if water is not part of education in architecture and planning and urban design, we have a long way to go to talk about it in terms of well-being, because we are unable to relate what is it going to impact if a building is done in this way, if the city is done in that way, without taking into consideration the water sustainability and so on and so forth. So if we are sitting here as part of where we are in water resources, how do we go from there if we look at water cycle? The water cycle, simple water cycle of primary school actually looks like this in a real time in terms of urbanization. So when we look at water consumption and actual water cycle, we realize that it is all the play or interplay of wastewater in our system, in the habitation, in the city, in the neighborhood, in the building. So, and the entire effort of city planning and designing, if ignoring water, misses the chance that the whole effort has to be towards treating a water which is more usable, not only for potable, but other industrial, domestic, and agricultural purposes. And the result of not realizing this is that we have become the largest groundwater extractor in the world. So today we consume so much of groundwater because it is coming for free, because electricity is much easier to afford, and then groundwater becomes easy to access. And we are not realizing that constantly we are producing more wastewater because our whole planning and design of cities are based on consumeristic approach, not essentialism approach. So if we have to continue this development model, then we have to also accept and know the fact that we are actually playing or dealing with cities full of wastewater. And a classic example is that if we are extracting water from groundwater, if we are bringing water from 200 kilometers to 1200 kilometers, my city gets water from 1200 kilometers. Delhi gets water from 200 kilometers. If we are getting extra water despite having our own water, if we are getting water from all over, we are not realizing that we are producing equal amount of wastewater. And now we are a, I will say, city and country of full of wastewater, and not a single city we have which is 100% recycling or treating or even addressing an ounce of the wastewater. So if we are sitting all over wastewater without substantial planning of it, we have to really start thinking where are we heading for, with 70% of our water requirements coming from groundwater. And then the remaining 20% coming from distant locations. I'm talking about the urbanized situations. So if we are sitting in this kind of water resource bed, then talking about all kinds of impacts of it has to be seriously thought. And interestingly, the impacts are also not taught in architecture and planning. And for me, that is deeply, saddening as well as concerning, because if we are not teaching water and water management and water planning along with land management and planning, we are also escaping from the impact of it, that is pollution. So if we are sitting with wastewater all the time, if we are sitting with solid waste all the time, which is a major production in cities now, we all know about it, then we are missing a serious point in talking about well-being, because our well-being is dependent on how healthy the environment is for not only us but for others. So we have to come to that realization. I'm focusing here on only water pollution, but please understand that water pollution, air pollution, and land pollution are all interrelated pollution. They are not independent of each other. So I am focusing on water. So if the impact of development has to be on land, water, and air, and if we are not relating it and constantly developing land, and by the way, we are also developing now underwater, on water, all kinds of planning and designing without even realizing its impact on other beings, its impact on overall environment. So if we consider land, water, air simply as environment, and biodiversity as other beings, fauna and flora, if everything is for humans, are humans going to live without others, especially water bodies and other beings? And that is a question which needs to be discussed and asked in our discipline. And I think we are shying away from that question in much of our planning and design education. And if we are not doing that, then we have to really look at where we stand today. And we are really in a serious situation of not only water pollution, but air pollution, soil pollution, along with water pollution. And it has become a situation that we are in a difficult state of affairs where what is more serious pollution needs to be debated or needs to be, I will say, mourned. It's really difficult now and to discuss these three in isolation, but at the same time, we have to also understand that these three as a discipline are taught differently, and ironically its pollution is also taught and practiced differently. We are yet to really look for integration of the three components, mainly land, water and air, and then of course the biodiversity part of it. And somewhere architecture planning education has to really now cling on to these issues more seriously than ever. And because when we are talking about built environment, we have been teaching, and I remember from 20 years ago when I graduated, uh, it was all about built environment shapes human behavior. It was not much about human well-being. And I think now it's a time we have to talk about human well-being. And if we don't talk about, then behavior is also not changing accordingly. So if I just look at the global standards of epidemics, I'm just giving water again as issue. So unsafe water kills more people than disasters and conflicts. Not that disasters and conflicts are smaller, but just to give you an overview that water epidemics is the major epidemic, and it should be declared pandemic, to be honest, but just because poor people suffer more, it is not yet declared as a pandemic. So if you even go by statistics, we have more deaths based out of water epidemics than any other disease. So who to be held responsible for? And if you go into the depth of the issue, you find out that actually it's the pollution of the water, it is pollution of the soil and land, because they are all interrelated. All waste that we produce in society eventually leads to the water bodies. There is no other way that they are going to go anywhere. Even if it goes into the soil, we are also talking about going into the groundwater. So that brings a serious issue of global scale water epidemics. And that has to be addressed when we start talking about water planning. We have to start talking about water epidemics. If we are still not teaching water planning and management in the top management and technology and architecture schools, I feel we are still far to even discuss water epidemics. And this is where we have to be more futuristic as teachers and start talking about it. Maybe we have to go backwards and start talking about water epidemics first and then bring water planning and management into the course. I don't know what will be the trajectory of inducting water education in planning and architecture, but I'm just thinking loud with all of you. So an important aspect which comes out very often and is the difference between health and well-being. And I'm sure you all will agree with me that health is discussed a lot. Well-being is not discussed as much as health is discussed. And ironically, health is often linked with infrastructure. Means we talk about hospitals, we talk about primary healthcare sectors, doctors, nurses, per capita, per square kilometer. All these things are indicators of health. But when we want to talk about well-being, I think there are more indicators to be discussed. Greenery, safety of the place. And I was just reading a beautiful article last month when I realized that hearing birds chirping every day brings well-being to your heart. And this is such an important aspect which we have completely overlooked, you know. So it's, I mean, I remember last year I was talking about a group of students talking about if you see sunshine or sunrise and sunset every day and moonrise and moonset, your day is well lived. And here I come to know last month that every day hearing a bird chirping is going to make you live longer. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to really talk about, but did we design buildings and habitats for birds? Did we really do our design according? Just to give a small indicator for it. But anyway, coming to the water stress and relating it well-being, I was really keen to show you what is going on in India. I mean, in terms of water crisis, we are among the top 10 countries in the world in terms of water crisis. But mind you, this is the water crisis based on access to water. So just giving you a snapshot, but I want to focus more on the impact of in terms of well-being. But now coming to the groundwater contamination, the real health part of it, and we see that more than half the population in the country has, problem with water quality, then access to water, and of course it's hitting badly to women, to children, and women of all age groups because we have different age issues. But if we talk about human then, but I'm going to show you in the next slide what happens with the other beings and why these things have to be interrelated. And you already see a slide at the bottom where I'm showing on drought situation where all the animals are, in a bad state. In fact, we in my state had some time ago an epidemic rise with all the cattle. So these are very common features, but do they come in the forefront of discussing that maybe it is an impact of some kind of development? Maybe the poor people are suffering more from water quality and access to water because development as a notion itself is elitist. And it is somewhere neglecting the poor people. I'm still stressing on water impact on human being because some slides after this will come to other beings. But even we are not sanitized from water impacts or health impacts. So this is direct health impact. But I think for me, most shocking thing was 3 months ago when I came across a paper talking about breast milk having microplastics. It's a pollution from the water. It's pollution from the environment which is coming. And I think this is a serious thing. I mean, all have now plastic in our body. All creatures have plastic in our body. Just to give you one example of impact of pollution on all of us, showing impact of pollution on other beings. This is, I think, very common now. But are we addressing it in the built environment? And this, I would like to stress here that building and built environment produces the maximum amount of solid waste also in the planet. So are we taking responsibility as architects, designers, and planners? Because many of it goes into the water body. We may talk about FMCG, but we cannot pretend not talking about the built environment waste production. And especially when a situation in which we are living in India, when we talk about we have more vacancy rate than occupancy required. So if we are continuously building and we are producing waste continuously, where are we going to stop? So it's not only plastic pollution, but just to give you an idea how health impacts other creatures. It's said that now more than 90% death in other creatures are because of the pollution, human-induced pollution, and they are not dying natural death. So we have to start thinking what kind of environment, built environment we are creating that other creatures are not dying natural and 90% of them dying unnatural or from pollution. So in other words, so we have to this is India on the right side, as you can see, what's killing our cows. And it's our waste. It's every other lane waste which we are producing. So we have to start thinking. I mean, on the bottom right, you see a picture where a cow was operated and 80 kilos of waste was taken out of its belly. 80 kgs. So these are waste produced from all walks of life, and built waste is the majority of the waste. All these, glass, wood, plastic are wrapped around. Wrappers contribute to 40% of waste. All building wrappers, building material wrappers contribute to 40% of the waste. So we have to start thinking about it because we are choking ourselves in pollution. And pollution, I feel, is a major impact of development. It's I think the gift of development, and that is where personally I am questioning development. So are we planning and designing with water or without water? I think our profession has to start linking with the global and country goals, which we are not. We are indifferent. We are just doing our own for few little projects, and we are not really linking it with what is the country's goal for sustainability, what is the global goal for sustainability. We are just doing. And I'm giving a very simple example of lake development, which is my research area. So when we envisage a lake, we see a beautiful natural feature, but when we develop a lake as an architect, designer, planner, we build it like this. This is where the difference has to come in our education as well as our profession. So if we are doing it in this way, then we have to really look at our global goals and talk about some philosophical and ethical aspects of it. Important problem identification is that our profession has to change from elitism to essentialism. We are not actually educating ourselves and our clients to go with essentialistic, the approach of built environment, of living and lifestyle. And I think that's where Sustainable Development Goal 11 and 12 have to be at the forefront of all Sustainable Development Goals. Whereas if you look at every country's budget, there is no budget for these two goals. And likewise in India, there is no budget for these two goals. So, I mean, that itself already talks about that it is not in our priority, even if they are in sustainability goals. If you look at goals and if you really want to do something about it, then I think the logical goals are looking at life underwater and life on land. And that's where I was talking about biodiversity or the other we for which I'm concerned about. If we start planning for them, we are better off. And for me, that's a simple logic. This is an interesting study done in China. So how other sustainable development goals are linked with the life on land and life inside water of other beings, not human beings. Likewise, in India, we are again also talking about it. But if you look at the fund allocation on marine life, on forest, on ecology and environment, and if you look at the fund allocation on urban development, on defense, I mean, and on education, you start knowing that where is the priority of the society. And if we are not looking at those things, simply if we can start going back to the basics, primary school, middle school, high school, we have learned about all these things, the relationship of biodiversity and human health. Can we bring it back to architecture and planning education and start designing cities in a way where other creatures can co-inhabit it? I don't know what that is going to be, but I just want to throw this question to all of you because I think these are very, very, fundamental aspects which we need to talk about because if we consider that there is a positive effect of biodiversity on well-being, we have to start talking about and start designing about biodiversity because then and then only we can talk about well-being. Because what has happened between health and well-being is that we have to fall ill to become healthy, or the whole system design of cities are like we are falling sick or falling ill, and then we have health infrastructure to make us better. And I think the preventive approach of not falling ill is not part of the designing of cities and even not part of the planning and of cities. And this is where education comes in very handy. I'm showing a small example from my own city, how planning of a water body, because we're talking about water, can bring a change. One lake in last 20 years, how it has changed, and not for good, by the way. It may look good physically, but not good in terms of well-being of other creatures and also not well-being of human beings. So that is a lake development from top to bottom, and it has not done so much good. But apart from looking at the land value, which has become very high, again the river from my own city, from a very natural river to a humanly engineered river, not so good for other beings, but yes, good for us for land value, for our recreation, but not really good for other aspects. So if we are designing like this, we are still far. And if we are not considering wastewater in our education, not considering wastewater in our city planning and design, we will not be able to start considering impact of water or impact of water epidemics on our well-being. So there is, of course, an aspect of health, but my point is there is also an aspect of well-being, and well-being is health plus other being for me. And that's a very simple formula I'm putting forth in front of you, because if we are not seeing enough green, if I am not breathing enough fresh air, if I'm not getting enough good light, less noise in the city, less lights in the artificial lights in the city, I think my well-being is already compromised. I see my city glitterating with all kinds of light. You know, noise pollution to its extreme. Then where are we talking about well-being? I mean, birds cannot live in noise. Birds cannot live in those artificial lights. Animals cannot live in those. So at least have those parks, wetlands, rivers, which are no-go area for human beings. So these are very simple things which we can do in our city planning and design. So why not do these things in our city planning? Why not start considering waste land? Because I'm showing this as waste because our many of our streams are considered as wastelands, and these are wastewater carriers as well. Instead of that, if we can redesignate or redefine these wastelands into lands for other beings and not pollute them, we can be better off. But it's all about education, and I think it's also about how we are grooming ourselves right from home to university. How are we collectively looking at our neighborhood? Are we looking for good things within our neighborhood, or we believe that we have to live here as machine, and then every 6 months we will go for holiday in a beautiful green environment and where we have beach, where we have forest, and we go and come back to the polluted area? Can we have such places within our own walkable distance? I think this is a decision which every neighborhood level people have to take, and this is where our role as planning and designers comes very handy. Are we teaching our students to design, uh, environment friendly neighborhoods where I don't feel like going for holidays? I feel like on holiday every day. I should feel good in my neighborhood. And I think these things are very much possible through design, and we have to work on towards it. And if we are not working towards it through our small urban forests, urban wetlands, urban streams, which we call as wasteland, I think we are missing a point. There's no point building malls, no point building parks if we have our natural forest and natural water bodies compromised. And that is exactly what we are doing, compromising the natural features and making new features. So giving an example how we can really come back to it, and that's a collective action decision from all of us. We have a place called Auroville in India, which is trying hard to build a habitat which is sustainable with other beings co-living with them. So it's not that it is not possible, but an important learning from here is that you need a homogeneous community, collective thinking community with a mission, vision to work towards it. So I don't know how it can be done in a heterogeneous urbanized situation, but it is possible. And I think hypothetically, I'm saying it is possible, but there are many examples also in India. And if I look at our traditional wisdom, if I look at our tribal people, they have actually had this kind of life all through. It's only after urbanization when we have started talking about development, and development so much anthropocentrically that we completely forgot that we cannot survive without water, we cannot survive without other beings. So the de-development concept is already around, and it is the basis of de-development is actually based on well-being of all. So I think we have to start talking about it. We have to develop a social entrepreneurship in the profession about it, and start talking about how can we do. And I think the first change we have to bring a change in our own lifestyle and occupation. What is architectural education talking about? Is it talking about waste? Is it talking about pollution? Is it talking about water? Is it talking about biodiversity? If we are not talking about these four, five things, I think we are missing a point in architecture. I think we are missing a point in urban design and planning. We have to talk about them. It is not that everything is about recreation and aesthetics. We have to go past those things. And we have to talk about bringing a change, not only in ourselves, but also embrace this in the entire built environment. Do we need more buildings? Can we reuse buildings? Can we reduce our need of built space? Can we reuse our building space? So this is more of a metaphorical, that unless and until we bring a change in ourselves, we cannot even think of bringing a change in the built environment. And I think this bringing a change itself is a bringing a change from health way of looking at architecture to well-being way of looking at architecture. I am very much aware that the whole architecture actually was born, or architecture planning was born from health aspect. But I think it's a good time after a century that we start talking about architecture for well-being, and not for good health and happiness alone, but more. For me, it's extremely important now that we start talking about that we are because they are. So that's basically environment. We have to stop planning for people alone. We have to actually start thinking about ecology, because if ecology is there, we are there. It's not the other way around. So if at inception stage of planning, we are not talking about others' well-being, we are eventually doing development. And I think we are all seeing all over the world how development is getting disastrous. So we need to question the very development idea itself. And a classic example here is all the development uses fresh water for all kinds of planning and designing of cities. And ironically, to treat a wastewater itself requires fresh water. So where are we going to get those fresh water from after some time? So there is something wrong in our mathematics of water planning and management and design. So I have brought a small point here on patriarchy, very much from India, because I think the whole planning is, and design approach is patriarchal here, very masculine, very ornamental way of doing things. And I think we need to talk about more, sensitizing about it, softening the built environment, talking about safety, talking about green, fresh air, looking at flowers, looking at birds every day when we are walking to work or walking to shop. So we have to really talk about these things, because then and then only we are talking about well-being or good health from preventive measures, not from the cure measure. So building more hospitals may be important, but building a better neighborhood is even more important than building more hospitals. So that's the point I wanted to make today in my talk. And we have to take responsibility, as we are the polluters, so we have to come forward to start cleaning our planet more. And our profession, as I mentioned, is the biggest polluter in the planet. So we have to take responsibility on that. So this was a little game to stop here, and I would like participants to really give me a choice of which lake condition is better for you. And that's my actually last slide also, so to open up the floor for all. So these lakes are from India, and I would like participants to rate them as in their priority, X, Y, Z, W. Which one is 1, 2, 3, 4 for them?
I think I like the fourth one, the one at the bottom
So you can tell me
right.
Z, X, Y, W. Which one?
Oh, W.
W, okay. That's your first priority. And second, so you have to rate all of them in a row. So first,
Oh, okay. W in first, I guess. X second,
mm-hmm.
Z third, and then Y last.
Okay. So interesting. Maybe we hear someone else who differs with this kind of ranking with
I would probably say um, Z first, and then W, Y, and X.
YX. Okay. So we have two options. Anyone with the third option? There are many options possible. Huh? It's a permutation combination.
I would say Z, X, and W, and then Y.
Okay. Anyone else has a different option? And you're talking in terms of well-being for all, okay? And not well-being for human alone. If you talk about well-being for all, you may realize that the W is actually number 4. But if you talk about human being and well-being for humans, W may stand as number 1 or Z may stand as number 1. And this is the difference in perception we have to bring. Because in W, all the other beings are completely compromised. No fishes, of course, then no birds, no animals. And this is why I was very keen to show this picture and take your ranking for the same. So of course, Z is considered most natural, but let me tell you that Y is even better than W in terms of ecology and well-being for all. Because it's a dried lake and it may have many seeds and eggs of other beings. and they will flourish immediately when the rain comes. And X is the most polluted water. So anyway, it's going to kill all the other beings. So this is a very simple, I will say, pictorial evidence to start assessing how we look at what is good for others and for us. So we may not like why, because there are a lot of poor people and they are hutments, but ecologically and even from society point of view, they may not look good, but they are doing lesser harm to the planet than the rich educated elites who are making bigger and bigger buildings every day. They are recycling the waste which we produce as educated people. They are living on the lake bed. Yes, they don't have good living conditions. That's absolutely acceptable. But if we are talking about well-being of others and betterment of the lake, Y stands better than W. And I am very much sure about it. And I'm not surprised if people do not accept Y as a good condition of the water body. It's a very general perception we all have. So just to give you a small play of game, how we look at development and how we should be looking at development, I thought this will be a good slide to include. So may I request all of you to take a small pledge about water body so that we can start thinking about it very differently than we actually think about it. Because we have to start relating our own body as an organism, as city as an organism. They are not two different things. If water outside is dirty, it is dirty inside me also. And this is an important understanding to bring a change in the way we look at water bodies, the way we look at impact of water bodies on our health. See, it's a very simple formula. Everybody knows that if the water is polluted, we may get stomach ache, or if we drink polluted water, we may get. It's a very simple formula, but then it has a larger meaning also. If cities' water is polluted, if groundwater is polluted, we are definitely going to have an aggregated health impact. And not only health impact, but we are also going to have aggregated, mental well-being is compromised. I mean, it's a very general scholarship now available that the happiness level is reducing across the society. The well-being level is reducing across the society. There are more mental illness across the society, and we have to relate it with the environment in which we are living. And environment in nutshell can be actually the health of soil, health of air, health of water, and of course the health of other beings. If we have less and less birds, animals around us, we are not going to be happier. We cannot build cities and habitats only for human beings. Let me take questions from all of you.
Thank you, Mansee, for the presentation. I just wanted to push back a little bit more on why. The issue is that there's a lot of low density, and I could see that leading to a lot of sprawl, which could then cause more environmental issues. Not to mention, like, that could also maybe convert into housing for the more wealthy when there's more space. So I wonder what kind of like compromises you would have to include in order to build, if you wanted to build more densely and a little bit more compactly.
Yeah, it's a very good question, Harnan. But before that, I would like to ask a question along with that question, that do we need more buildings in the cities? Because this is a question every architect has to answer to themselves. And I now answer your question. Between compact city and urban sprawl, it's about how much buildings do we need. As I was telling you about India, you talk to most architects, they will talk about that there is a housing crisis and that's where more buildings have to be built and so on and so forth. If a city has 20% or 25% of vacancy rate, we need to question whether we need more buildings or not. Now, more buildings are built because there is more opportunity with the builders and architects to build. Not that there is a demand for it. The demand is building for poor people, but the supply is building for richer people. And that's the mismatch. Now, whether it is done in a compact manner or an urban sprawl is a question after that. So urban sprawl has become a very, very common phenomenon across the world now, even in India for that matter. Our cities are horizontally growing as well as vertically growing. And if my city has to live with 22% of vacancy rate, I might as well start questioning that also. And personally, I'm not in favor of our horizontal growth, as I mean, growing and taking all the greenfield sites and building and building and building more infrastructure and all, because we are increasing the load on land, we are increasing the load on water and all other resources for that matter, transportation, energy, lights, and you just name it. I personally, I think when we were studying in our younger days, it was more about compact city and smart city. And I think that there was some degree of essentialism attached to it. Now with sprawl, the whole aspect of essentialism has gone away, and as I was mentioning, our profession itself is serving elitism. It's not for essentialism. We are not teaching essentialism in the profession, so urban sprawl is a result of elitism, not really required. People have two, three, four houses. Now that is not questioned by the profession. That is not questioned by the policy. That's not questioned by the tax, at least in my country. So that is resulting in more urban sprawl. And I think that also has an impact on health, by the way. If I have four houses, how will I manage? I mean, it's a mental stress for me as well. I'm just giving a very light example for it. How much one can manage? We are running around between houses and offices and here and there because we do not have very good neighborhood to live and enjoy and appreciate. We are looking for happiness in malls, in resorts, in all kinds of other things, whereas we should have been looking for happiness just around us. That happiness should be in 10 minutes walk, and it's not there right now in urban areas. We can't even walk in Indian streets because we are in constant fear that a car is going to run over me, because everybody is honking and driving fast. So because people have to reach far. They are between house and office, it's 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers in my city, which is very less. In Mumbai, Delhi, it is 40, 50 kilometers every day driving one way. So sprawl is not going to solve the problem. Neither verticality is going to solve the problem. It's the match between demand and supply for the housing.
The reason that many of these houses are vacant, including this
Yes.
huge
Yeah.
vacancy issue that we have in post-industrial cities like Baltimore, Buffalo, Detroit, is actually the fact that these houses are not healthy at all. And I think that
Also, yes, very rightly pointed. Yeah.
and that refers to a need to use and utilize adaptive reuse and retrofitting
Absolutely.
older buildings. And unfortunately, this is what I have also realized, that in general, in architectural education, we do not pay much attention to adaptive reuse. That's the reason that we had our last Epidemic Urbanism
Yes.
competition focused on adaptive
Yes.
reuse, because our point was not to get a piece of land and just develop a new project, but
New
see
project.
what is around you and how you can
Yes.
kind of shift and kind of change and improve these buildings to make them work.
Absolutely. Very good point raised, because what I was trying to do through showing as an individual how we can change from rethinking, reusing, recycling. I think if we start comparing ourselves and city as organisms, we already start seeing that city also requires that kind of rethinking. We don't need to continuously develop and develop and develop. We have to start talking about retrofitting, recycling,
Yes.
reusing. It's extremely required, because there's no end to development. I mean, my city itself has 22% vacancy rate, and we are still building, by the way, new buildings. It's among the highest in the country. That's Ahmedabad.
I mean, for this presentation that I was having in Saudi Arabia, I was talking about this issue of vacancy in commercial buildings that we have in the US,
Yes.
because now about 25%, 25% of the commercial buildings are completely vacant. I mean, what does it mean? It means that, I mean, one out of four buildings around us are completely vacant. And the other
Vacant.
day, I was just driving in Columbia, Maryland. I mean, and
Mm-hmm.
this is a great location for any business, but I was seeing all these big kind of commercial parks that are completely empty now. And that also tells us that, now again, many of us sit there and complain about the lack of housing crisis, but I mean, it clearly shows that we need to convert some of these buildings into housing. And I know that they are doing it in San Francisco and New York. And I know
Yeah.
it's not also very sustainable, and it's a very expensive process.
Yeah, but Mohammed, it is also important that we start looking at the scholarship of de-development, which is growing around the world. I think the younger generation of than us will already start breaking a lot of things which we have built,
Mhm.
because many things are not required. And this will actually come as part of environmental restoration. And I will be very, very happy to see those things coming in my own lifetime, because it is coming, whether we like it or not. And I give examples in with respect to water. I mean, we just recently had dams are getting broken, not by us, but nature was doing its trick, because somewhere, I mean, we have to understand that we cannot tame the water, or we cannot tame environment or nature for that matter. Nature is going to balance itself this way or that way. And breaking of dam is a classic example of it.
I was kind of curious, you talked about changing attitudes, and like recently I had started reading about the concept of design for deconstruction, which is like when
Yes.
like proactively people try to design buildings that are easy to deconstruct. And I think it's interesting because you're talking about de-development, and I was wondering, like, is that a strategy that you see as having potential for like impacting change in terms of the environmental impact of buildings? Because like you said, a lot of the litter and trash that we see comes from buildings. And I know it's like I don't know if that's ideal, because like probably ideally you just build less, and then but I mean, yeah, have you seen any changes in terms of design for deconstruction and potential in that field?
Yeah. It's a very good question, Auma. And as you saw through my own presentation, I was really trying to raise more philosophical and, going through more metaphors of using humans in with respect to cities. Honestly speaking, if I look at my own career of 30 years, I am now very clear that not building anything is the biggest contribution an architect can do now on the planet, you know and I'm really making a very big statement, I know, but I'm very clear on that. When I'm saying not building anything, I mean not building anything on a greenfield site, or on a very virgin forest land. You cut the trees. I mean, I can give an example right here in near my neighborhood, a lake front where 1,000 trees were cut to make an Ayurvedic garden. Give me a logic behind it. I mean, and it is done by an urban designer architect of the city. How did they do that? So this is where my question is really on morality of education. And I think if we are not taking redevelopment as a step in architectural pedagogy, redevelopment is coming on its own naturally. And I think younger generation of like you people, if you are concerned about pollution, if you are concerned about well-being, if you are concerned about the rising suicide rates of youth, and I will link it with the built environment. People are living in such constrained environment with no light, no ventilation, no sociability in living environment. How are they going to feel happy? So indirectly, if you are changing your path of profession, or if you are taking a particular path of ecology or biodiversity, you are already taking the path of development. It doesn't mean that we have to go and break buildings. Not making new things is anyway going to bring new ways of dealing with built environments, And Angkor Wat is a classic example of Cambodia. If you leave a city for some years, if you leave a building for some years, nature is going to take it over. So, I mean, we have to have some things which are essential. I'm not denying that. But who is going to draw that line of essentialism? Is it not our profession? If we are reached by a client and client is asking for a 5-bedroom house, you rather teach them that you don't need these many buildings. Just because I'm going to get more fees doesn't mean I have to offer more bigger buildings. You know, we have lived in our own lifetime. I mean, if I talk about my generation, where in the entire house of 6, 7 people, there used to be one toilet. And now we have everyone in the house has a toilet for themselves. And there is within the house, we are a divided family now. There is a private zone within our own house. Now even mothers and parents cannot walk to children's room. So if we are divided and discriminating inside our own house, we are doing the same outside between humans, rich and poor, caste and religion. So then we are still far from being inclusive to other beings. And I'm talking about other beings. I'm not even talking about the discrimination we are doing between humans. You know, like ghettoism is between religion and communalism. It's a big issue. And all these things create, issues related to well-being. If I don't feel safe going to that neighborhood because it is not belonging to my community, that itself is a question mark on well-being. You know, if I cannot walk in the dark because, I mean, India has also another problem of women's safety. Rape is a serious problem. Abduction is a serious problem. Children molestation is a serious problem. Then we have to start thinking about designing cities in that way. We have to start talking about. So de-development is actually stepping aside from the whole development saga of economy.
Because you are talking about all these kind of ethical concerns, and I'm really
Yes.
happy that we are having this conversation. So
Yes.
my hope is that students, when they want to choose a material, they want to choose a project, they want to, I
Yes.
mean, you start even asking these big questions, and that's exactly the reason that we have you here. There's a lot of push, and my question for you is very specific. There's a lot of push in the US to establish mass timber as a new kind of alternative material. And coming from a region in which timber and wood is so rare, and using timber results in major kind of environmental crisis,
Yes.
I mean, I tend to question this, and I know that there are big lobbies behind this, but I want to
Yes.
see what's your take on this because I might be wrong.
I mean, you're giving example of timber, and I will also draw an analogy with plastic here because plastic was brought to save timber or save wood from the forest, and now you see where we stand in plastic. And I think if we start promoting timber as a building material, there is no harm as long as we are doing it. Again, it's a question of demand and supply. How much timber do we use? You know, it's a trade-off. Because if we have taken the path of elitism as design, elitism as city, so we are designing cities for recreation, for having fun. We are not designing cities to live. That's my fundamental question. You know, are we doing livable cities, or we are actually making every city look like a Las Vegas? And that's where my problem is. You know, how much extravagant we need in cities. So if it is for essentialism, I mean, I can see from my own context, I mean, the entire tribal community used to build from wood, but they used to have one little house. But now, if that one little house is converted into 7-story building for only 3 people in the house, the richest house in the country, we have to start looking at if every poor person or middle class person becomes a richer person, which everybody aspires to, and they would like to have that much of resource or house at their disposal and office at their disposal, then there is a problem. Otherwise, if you look at the way our traditional people or ancestors used to live, timber would have been the best option to make house, not considering the safety aspect or fire aspect of it, but in terms of quantity of timber to be exploited. I mean, and now there are commercial forests for construction industry, but how much? Because commercial forest itself is a degradation of biodiversity. It's a monoculture. I mean, Japan is a classic example. They are suffering from monoculture. We may look at Japan and look at it as a beautiful landscape. No, sorry. They have a serious problem with their biodiversity because of the monoculture. So I mean, growing forest itself is against the nature of law.
Right,
You
right.
have to let the forest grow, not grow the forest. These are two different approaches. Sorry, I'm talking
And
a
I
bit of
think that
metaphor and philosophical, but I think these are important questions now to hit in
absolutely, and I
vocabulary.
think the problem starts when we are trying to come up with simple answers for
Yes,
question. I
linear.
mean, for the questions that we have, and sometimes we are not even willing to consider a totally different kind of alternative reality that exists
Yes,
out there, right? And I'm glad that by showing these four pictures, you were telling us about this reality that we may not see. I mean, it's there, but we don't see it this way because we are so used to using certain kind of lens in the way that we look at the
templates. We
building.
have templates now for
Yes, we
development.
do
We
have.
have so much, we are, I think it is to do with the education for enlightenment vis-a-vis education for employment, our education for economy. And if it is for enlightenment, then I think the basis of education has to be questioning everything. And if the younger generation is geared to question everything, half of the problems can be really addressed. They have to ask our generation question: Why did you build so much? Why did you pollute the planet so much? Why so wide roads? We are developing roads like US now. We are developing waterfronts like Europe now, like US now, without realizing that our waterfronts are very different. Our water systems are different. Our water systems are to remain dry for half the year, whereas we want them to be filled for year round. We are already changing the ecology. So I think we have to really start questioning what's going on, and that has to be the basis of any education for that matter.